It's Tarke here, and today I'm making a interesting-ish video, and it's all about hostility and the growing state of hostility in the Pathofexile community. Why am I making this video? Just very briefly, it's something I've been thinking about doing for a while. I put out a quick poll on my Twitter, and it got some pretty good feedback, and it seems like people were mostly in favor of it. So I made this like big old script, and I will just kind of go through it, and I've got a bunch of example points, and yeah, just hear me out on this. So, what is the problem? PoE has always been praised for its welcoming and amazing community. There are great pockets within the PoE community across the Reddit, forums, content creators, artists, etc. This is sadly no longer the case. It's not that it's bad, but it's becoming far less welcoming. With how the PoE subreddit dominates the PoE community in terms of engagement, this may seem like I'm just hating on Reddit, but Reddit isn't really the problem here. This is something that's propagated by Reddit, content creators, that's me, and GGG themselves. So, why should we care? To put it very simply, it's becoming a lot harder to actually get GGG interviews. With how like hostile stuff's being and everything that's just going on in the world currently, it's just difficult getting devs involved, and that affects everyone because having devs involved with the community is fun. It's not that they're going to stop doing it completely, but it's getting harder and harder. We're getting less stuff, and it has a real impact outside of the like emotional toll that it takes on people, which is a very real problem that needs addressing. So that's why you should care. So, currently there's a lot of resentment building on all sides, and by that I mean like within the community, from just casual players on forums, subreddits, within content creators, and within the devs themselves. And it just seems to be further dividing people and pushing people out of the scene. There are more hostile or toxic video game communities than Pathofexile, obviously, but just because something else is worse doesn't mean that we can't talk about it when it comes to PoE. Now, I'm also not expecting this video to fix anything, but I think it's an important conversation to have, and it might just make some people aware of a situation that they don't see as being a problem. So, you're like, okay, but Tarke, criticism is important, and you're trying to stop me from criticizing glaring problems with PoE. Not the case at all. I'm someone who's known for being very vocal when there's a problem, I think, with the game. A good example being I made a video this league when the whole stash tab situation was going on, and I was very critical of this stash tab situation, how Pathofexile is monetized, but at no point in this video did I like single out a particular dev or blame any individual for the direction of something I didn't like. You can criticize stuff, you can be very negative, but you can do it in a way where you're not like, just for example, Chris Wilson, you were ruining everything, you were the problem. Like, people very regularly just pick a random dev, in many cases whoever spoke last, and then just goes all in on that one person, and that isn't the solution. And you see the exact same thing with other content creators, certain content creators just receiving all the hate for an opinion, or within different community threads, there'll be a discussion with two different people on Reddit, they disagree, and it just turns to insults instantly, and it just puts people off joining. Like, it just puts people off. So, what are some examples that I would give of, like, the results of this stuff? Or, like, okay, but, like, this is just purely anecdotal. So, here's a comment from Chris that was around the start of the league. This thread results in one of our senior staff breaking down into tears while talking to me about it. The thing that people seem to forget is that while GGG is a company, there are a lot of real people who work there, and it often just ends up just being hate targeted at an individual person. This isn't just something which affects the devs, it also affects content creators, and it affects people in the community. We've seen a lot of really messed up stuff recently, again, mostly on Reddit. There was the whole Paws thing, when Paws made her post with her experience with being within the Pathofexile community, and the thread ended up getting locked, loads of accounts had to get banned, and you get a lot of people who, they aren't aware or they don't see some of the problems, so they just say there is no problem, and they just close their ears and say there's nothing going wrong, and I'm sure we'll see some of that on this video. This also happened again very recently, like literally a day ago, when someone was like, oh, the artwork for Dab of Ink has a person literally dabbing. And it ended up turning into this big thing about some of the reasons why DCLara stopped streaming. And again, you get a bunch of people saying, there is no problem, I don't see the problem, harassment isn't real in the PoE community, everything is perfect. Those are some set examples, there are loads more. I'm not going to go into personal conversations I've had with other content creators and developers, but there are many people who have quit or are seriously considering quitting PoE because they can no longer handle this like harassment and hostility. These are really talented people, both inside the content and the dev side, and it would be a real loss for everyone if people started leaving. It would like really suck if these guys were gonna, be piecing out. So, we've also had big divides in Pathofexile before. This isn't anything new. We had a really big divide in early beta and early launch with the whole softcore versus hardcore mentality. Throughout beta and early launch, there was this very big, like it sounds stupid, but there was this really big issue, right? For a long time, hardcore was considered to be the only right way to play the game. And if you ever said that you played softcore, you would get absolutely shit on. And you get a lot of people who would just they just quit playing, or they just didn't want to interact with things. They didn't want to admit that they played softcore, as dumb as that sounds. And it was actually it was really dumb. And that hasn't been a thing for a very long time, since the vast majority of the player base is softcore now. That's kind of when that shift kind of happened. There used to be separate leagues, that went away, then everyone went majority softcore. And now, if anything, it's kind of swinging the other way, where people get bullied for playing logout core, and it's just a bunch of softcore people for, shitting on hardcore players. But anyway, so what are some of the causes? Like, what are some of the things which I think causes this kind of behavior? The game is growing in size. It's kind of inevitable in a way. The larger a community gets, naturally the more vocal the fringes will be. The PoE subreddit mod team hasn't grown to match the new workload, and, using Reddit as the example, the mods are clearly very overworked, and they're trying to get new mods in, and I definitely would not want that job. That is a very soulless job, especially when you're not being paid to do it. That is just a definite issue, is the player base gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The vocal bits are going to get more and vocal, and it's just get louder. But that doesn't mean you just ignore it and say, well, there's nothing we can do. Also, and this is something which I think makes it a lot more intense for the developer side of things, because of the intense content cycle window we have, we get this really tight cycle of extreme hate and also extreme praise. Because we get new leagues coming out every single 3 months, you get that this is the worst league ever made, everything is awful, and then you do get that praise, this is the best league ever, but because of how rapid it is, you end up having the hatred souring the praise. I've had this conversation with people where it's like, there was a league that was very poorly received at the start, it's then positively received at the end, and the devs will then be kind of like, well, screw them, they're being bitter. It's a serious issue where, if, as I said, if you buy a new shirt and 5 people tell you that the shirt looks great on you, and then someone says that's the worst shirt I've ever seen, you'll remember that, it sticks in your head. There is an issue there, and because the window is so small, it's very unique. A lot of other games, they might only have, like other live service games, one big update a year, or maybe every 6 months. So that window is very stretched out, and it's just not as intense. And the intensity is part of the problem. Negative feedback loops. There will be an underlying issue with a given piece of Pathofexile. Something with the league being buggy, or like the mechanic needing buffing, but there'll be something will be wrong. There'll be a core issue. So people are upset, quite rightly so, that there's something wrong with the game and it's getting in the way of their enjoyment. So people start making threads, and more threads pop up, people get angrier, and generally speaking, the spicier the thread, the more drama-filled, the more extreme the thread, the more attention it gets. You'll then get people who kind of twist the info a little bit to make the absolute most extreme point, and then you get this big thing, it gets this huge uproar behind it, and then GGG has to make a public comment, right? So they have to make a comment about either things they're going to change going forward, or the actual change they're going to make to fix or address this core problem. So what's the takeaway from this? The takeaway is, if I make a really angry thread and I say a bunch of, really messed up stuff and it gets a bunch of attention, well, that's what GGG listens to, so people want to keep doing that. This also isn't helped when you have Chris joking on Bay Class that, like, GGG likes angry Reddit threads, so you get people just making angry Reddit threads and just memeing the hell out of everything. And you can say, well, obviously the solution to this, Tarke, is just make good leagues. Like, if they make good leagues, there won't be any problem. It's a nonsensical argument to make. There will never be a perfect league. There'll always be something that could be improved, and eventually there'll be a change GG has to make, which is for the benefit of the game that people aren't happy with. A good example being when they buffed Monster Life recently. That was a very unpopular change, but now we see it was actually a very good change. You cannot appease everyone constantly. There's always going to be some hostility, and you could accuse GGG of trying to, like, sit on the fence, and because they're trying to appease so many different crowds and so many different play styles, they're always kind of messing with someone, and that's what's causing part of these problems. And also something which is worth thinking about is when you get these big scrambles, we had a couple of them this league, we had the whole thing with the stash tabs, where they have to make public statements. That's time that's taken away from game development. That's time taken away from fixing issues of the league, working on the next league. And that just isn't sustainable. You don't want to have every league, okay, here's a week or 2 weeks that we set aside, which will be this is the week of damage control. It's just not efficient. Like, you want to minimize that. It's not healthy emotionally, and it's not healthy financially and for the future growth of the game, because it robs development. Also, and this is a thing, Reddit has a real reputation of being negative, and Reddit isn't only negative. There are some very good, positive, fun things on there. It isn't all just hate. However, because there is this reputation that Reddit is mostly just negative, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You'll get mostly passive users with very few users actually putting stuff on there, and a lot of the positive users will either leave Reddit completely because they don't like the negativity, or they just continue to lurk while the negativity continues to get pushed up to the top. Karma farming. So this is kind of a lesser issue, but it's part of the same kind of problem. People like karma. They like getting gilded. They like feeling important. They like being on the front page. If there's a bunch of hate going on, and you know that you can make an easy hate thread and it'll get to the top, psychologically you want to do that. This is also true of content creators. If there's a bunch of hate going, it's very easy to make an angry YouTube video, and you know that will get a bunch of clicks, that'll get a bunch of positive attention, and clicks equals money, and a lot of streamers are struggling financially, so you're actually financially incentivized to make hateful content or drama-filled content. You could even accuse this video of trying to be drama content to try and get clicks. It's just, it comes with the platform. That is kind of part of the problem. Also, the 1%. This is just like a brief point, but I do think this is kind of part of the problem and part of the new like hardcore versus softcore. So the ever-present 1% meme is, to me, the modern-day hardcore versus softcore mentality. It also happens to separate most content creators from the average player. The whole average player thing is a separate topic, but anyway. And since it's generally content creators who have the most direct access to GGG, you end up with a very us versus them mentality. You see this very commonly, where there'll be a podcast or a YouTube video or a random streamer will make a random thread, or they'll have a clip post on the Reddit, and then the Reddit will just be like, oh, these 1%ers, they hate us elitists and all of that stuff. And vice versa, you get the streamers, you know, turning back on the Reddit. You then just end up with two sides regularly shitting on one another, and it just stirs the pot and just further breeds this hostile kind of environment. We've seen a lot of it this league, especially with viral Twitch clips doing the rounds on Reddit, and streamers end up just stoking the flames, and it just becomes even more heated, right? And then talking about like the streamers themselves, what they directly can do to make things worse, and this is something which often does happen. So streamers are just as capable and oftentimes of putting out hateful content themselves towards other parts of the community or the devs directly. I will say though that some of the time, not all of the time, but quite a lot of the time, this will come from random clips being taken out of streams and then posted onto Reddit for drama rather than set deliberate content. There was a big thing which happened after a Bay class where we had Neon on, where Rise said some really stupid comments about Neon after he was really frustrated after a very long stream. It was just a throwaway comment. How that it got posted onto Reddit, it caused a big drama, and it reflected really badly on us, and it's something which does happen. Just to give you an example of how easy it is for this to happen, here is a clip someone made of something I was talking about earlier when I was talking about just like a random example of what can happen. Ziggy is the root of all PoE drama, and if it wasn't for Ziggy D, Pathofexile would be Nirvana. Ziggy is... So yeah, it's very easy to take random clips out of context. So in the case of where I was throwing out this random tangent thing, you see stuff like that end up getting front page all the time, and it actually does cause problems, and people do that just because they want to stir drama because spicy content. You can also argue that you have streamers who do the exact same thing to Reddit in the forums. So you'll get people who purposely go on Reddit just to find a random negative comment and use it as a straw man to justify whatever it's going to say and paint all of Reddit with a bad brush. This whole very targeted, context-moving thing, it just isn't healthy, it doesn't promote good discussion, and it just damages everyone. It's not good. And then GGG is also part of the problem here. So you could argue that GGG set themselves up for failure, and that over-reliance on the PoE subreddit only makes things worse. So you could be like, well, it's their fault they've got such a tight content schedule, they can't make the content polished enough, That's the problem there. And then because they only use the PV subreddit, it then promotes people being toxic, and people are toxic and really hateful, and then that gets the feedback. So if instead of being so reliant on the PV subreddit, they actually maintained and expanded the official Pathofexile forums, which are in a very poor state, then they'd be able to better moderate and promote healthy discussion through a team of their own paid community managers, because then you wouldn't have the issue that you currently have with the PV subreddit where there just aren't enough mods. Because you have community managers, there's people whose job it is to do that, thanks to the raid, by the way. And then you're like, okay, but who cares, Tarke? Like, GGG is a company, and I'm a consumer. If things are shit, I'll say they're shit. You know, this goes back to my original criticism versus hostility point. You can say when things are bad without tearing down an individual person. You know, you can be like, I think this is a real problem, this needs to be addressed, without just tearing down one person specifically, as I've kind of done in this video, except for us be memes here and there. Also, in many cases, it's worth noting that if you just put out something really hateful, just like shitting all over GGG, in many cases, it's not just this like nebulous entity, this like corporation. Most times it's directed at particular devs, and ultimately these people are real people who read this stuff and they have to engage with this stuff. And also, this negativity further breeds, it spreads, and that's also how we interact with other posters, other content creators. There are a lot of content creators who just straight up quit the scene completely because they couldn't handle this stuff. So what's like a possible solution to this? And obviously this is a very complex thing, and this is me just kind of opening up the discussion, and I'm very curious to hear what you think are the solutions, if you think this is a problem at all. But yeah, I would say far better moderation. I think moderation is key to a lot of these things, and if you had better moderation, a lot of this stuff would be very heavily minimized. I also think that GGG needs to really evaluate how they engage with the community going forward, what it is they want to do, and is it just going to be a sad reality that, yep, you're going to put yourself out there, you're going to do the community podcast and stuff, but you're going to have to just face the backlash every time. Hopefully, it can be a situation where people feel comfortable to do that without receiving that, but maybe that's just all there is. Or possibly, we could all just try and be a bit less of a dick sometimes. Just universally, we could all try and be a bit nicer to each other. But yes, anyway. I'm Tarke. Let me know what you think about that. Have a good day. Bye-bye.